I'm going to make a video of everything fractions, decimals, and perimeter. So since you're doing perimeter right now, so suppose you have a rectangle. It's basically length and width. So the perimeter, you would write P equals 2L plus 2W. That's the formula for perimeter. So the first thing you do when you're doing area and perimeter is you find out what the formula is, and then you plug in whatever they tell you the length is and the width. So say the length is 8 and the width is 4. Then you're going to rewrite the formula and you're going to plug in an 8 where it says L, and then you're going to plug in a 4 where it says W. So you're going to write it like that, and then you're going to solve it. So you're going to say P equals 16 plus 8. Do you see how I didn't solve it and just write the answer? I actually just put what 2 times 8 is here, and then I put what 2 times 4 is here. So you're going to do it just like this. And now on this step, you're going to write what the answer is. And say this was in centimeters, then you're going to write centimeters. So that is perimeter. That's how you do it each time. It's going to have 4 steps. It's going to be writing the formula. It's going to be plugging in the numbers. And then you're going to solve for the individual numbers, and then you're going to solve for the whole thing. Does that make sense? The last step is labeling your answer with whatever the unit is. For a square, the formula is P equals 4A. Sometimes you might see it and it says 4S. So that's just, both of these stand for side. One is an A and one is an S, and you will see it both ways, so it means the same thing. And all that means is that you write the same number. So the side equals 5 meters, say. You would write P equals 4 times 5. Then you would solve it. And then do you see how this one doesn't have 4 steps? Because you didn't have to add anything together. So this one's only 3 steps, and then we put our label in just like that. Does that make sense? Okay. Then for a triangle, you might do that next. The formula is P equals A plus B plus C. So A stands for side, B stands for base, and C stands for side. So suppose you had 5, 5, and 5. You're just going to write P equals 5 plus 5 plus 5. And then you're going to simplify it. P equals 15, and say this was in inches. Then you're going to label your answer inches. Does that make sense? All right, awesome. Hold on, let me just move my lighting. Okay, so those are the main ones for perimeter. But basically what perimeter means is that you're measuring the outside of the object or the shape. Area means that you're measuring the inside of the shape. So you would use perimeter if you were building something like a garden and you wanted to measure around the garden. But if you wanted to measure how much soil you needed in your box, like your planter box, you would use area. Does that make sense? Okay. Now for fractions. So I'm just going to start with basic, and I'm just going to go through the whole entire thing. So this is the numerator. This is the denominator, right? So I'm just going to write numerator, denominator. This says how many shaded parts there are, and this is the total number of parts, right? Easy? If you are adding and you have the same denominator, all you do is add the numerators, and then you just write the denominator. So 5 plus 1 is 6. you do not add the denominators, you just write the number again. If the numerator and the denominator are the same, that equals 1, so you would just write equals 1. Make sense? All right, if you have 2/3 plus 1/2, we have unlike denominators, so we have to make them the same. So what is the common number that we can change this into?
6.
Yeah, so you just write 6, 6. And then what would I have to do to this to make it into a 6? I would multiply it by 2. Anything I do to my denominator, I do to my numerator. This becomes 4/6. Hopefully this is review, right? I'm just doing a quick everything review. Okay. Now we have the same denominator, we add the numerator, and we have an improper fraction. We cannot leave it that way. So what we do is we say, how many times does 6 go into 7? 1 time. What's my remainder? That becomes my numerator, and we put it over the denominator. Make sense? Okay. If we're multiplying, then we just do multiply numerator, multiply denominator. 2 times 5 is 10. 3 times 6 is 18. And then we always have to look at our answer and simplify it. So what number goes into 10 and 18? 2. So we divide the numerator by 2. We divide the denominator by 2. And then we make sure, is that as low as it can go? Yes. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Now, sometimes we might have a mixed number, in which case you would turn it into an improper fraction. So to do that, we do denominator times whole number plus numerator. So 3 times 2 is 6, 7, 8. So it's 8/3 times 6 times 1 plus 5 is 11/6. Now we multiply across, and then we would simplify. Did you learn cross cancellation? Or no?
Yeah.
Okay, so I like to do that because it makes my numbers manageable. So I'm going to find a number that goes into this, and now I have 44/9. And then I would change it into a mixed number. 9 goes into 44 how many times? 4. Oh, sorry. 8. 8/9. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
All right. Beautiful. Now to divide, we're going to do 3/8 divided by 1/4. So we rewrite the first fraction, we change division to a multiplication, and we flip the second fraction. Now we can either do the cross cancellation like this, or we can just go all the way across and do 3 times 4 is 12 over 8. I see my common denominator and numerator is a 4. So I'm going to divide that out, and it becomes 3/2. And then I change it to a mixed number, 1 1/2. Does that make sense? Okay. Do you have any questions about that?
No.
All right. Now you might have something that looks like this. Sorry, this is a dividing. So if you had that, you would first do the same steps, but the first step would be to change this to an improper fraction. So we would do 8 times 4 plus 3. So it's 32 plus 3 is 36 over 8. Change it to a multiplication. And then this is 4 times 4 plus 1 is 17/4. We have to flip the second fraction. It becomes 4/17. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to go over it again?
Sure.
Okay. So if I had 1 3/8 divided by 1 1/4, I first change these to an improper fraction. So we do 8 times 1 plus 3 is 11/8. I change this to a multiplication. Then I change...
Okay.
And then,
I know what to do.
okay, and then we flip the second fraction, and then we just simplify, and then we change it to a mixed number. 40 goes into 44 1 time. The remainder is 4. That becomes our numerator, and our denominator is over 40. And then I simplify. So I have 1 4/40, and I divide this by 4, and it becomes 1 1/10. Make sense? Yeah, this is just a quick review. Seems like you've got it. All right. Now for decimals, this is the tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, 100,000ths. So I'm just going to write that here. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And you'll see that everything on this side of the decimal ends in a TH, right? And then this is our normal place value. So this is the ones, tens, hundreds. Does that make sense to you? Okay. So what this means is 5 tenths. It's 5 over 10. This is 3 over 100. This is 2 over 1,000. But when it's a number like this, we don't break it up like this. It becomes 532 over 1,000. Does that make sense? Okay. So if they asked you to change this into a fraction, you would just take this as your numerator, and then the place value that it ends on will be your denominator. So this is the tenths, hundredths, and the thousandths. So that's how we know it's over 1,000. All right, to add decimals, we line up the decimals and we add. So if I had 0.5 plus 3.56 plus 0.006, I would take the biggest number. And then that looks weird, right? I don't like the way that looks. So what I am going to do is I am going to add zeros in all the blank spots so that it looks neat and lined up, and I can make sure that I'm not messing up any of this. So now that I have nice rows, I'm just going to do 6 plus 0 plus 0 is 6. 6 plus 0 plus 0 is 6. 5 plus 5 is 10. 3 plus 1 is 4. And then wherever my decimal is here, I just bring it down. So the answer is 4.066. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. For subtraction, I'm just going to do 5.36 minus 0.2. We do the same exact thing. We line up our decimals, and then we fill in with zeros just to keep us nice and lined up. And then we subtract. 6 minus 0 is 6. 3 minus 2 is 1. 5 minus 0 is 5. And then we just bring down our decimal, and it stays in the same place. Make sense? For multiplication, we're going to do it as our normal multiplication. So 5 times 6 is 30. 6 times 4 is 24. Plus 3 is 27. 6 times 3 plus 2 is 20. Now we're going to count in how many decimal spots this is in from the end of the problem. So I have 1, 2 spots here, and then I have 1 spot here. So that means I move my decimal 3 spots over. So every number we have in the world has a decimal in it. It's just imaginary. We don't write it. So we're going to go ahead and put that in at the end, and then we're going to move our decimal the number of spaces that we moved this. Does that make sense to you? So the answer is 2.070. All right. Now we're going to do division. So 6 goes into 8.53. Or actually, let's make it even. So we do 5 goes into 8 one time. 1 times 5 is 5. 8 minus 5 is 3. We bring down the 5. Then wherever the decimal is in your problem here is where we're going to put it here. Now we do 5 goes into 35 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. 35 minus 35 is 0. We bring down the 5. 5 goes into 5 one time. 1 times 5 is 5, and there's no remainder. When you're working with division of decimals, you can never have a remainder. You know how when you're doing normal division, you can't. You have to keep adding zeros until there is no remainder. But you can see we don't have a remainder, so we can stop. Do you have any questions about that?
No.
Okay, now there is an exception, and here's the exception. If you have a decimal in the divisor, which is the outer part of our problem, we have to do something about it. We cannot keep it like that. So we have to clear it out. And the only way to clear it out is to move the decimal however many spaces it takes to put it at the end of the number. So how many did I move to clear it out?
One time.
Yeah, so I'm going to move this one time, and instead of the decimal being here, it's now here. So what I like to do is rewrite the problem so that I don't get confused and make a mistake on where the decimal is. And then you can just go ahead and do the problem like normal. So 5 goes into 8 one time. 1 times 5 is 5. We do a subtraction. 8 minus 5 is 3. Bring down the 5. 5 goes into 35 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. We put our decimal right here. We bring down the 5. 5 goes into 5 how many times? One time. Make sense? Okay. Now converting from a decimal to a fraction. Did you have to do this?
Converting a decimal. Yeah, we did it.
Okay, and how did that go for you?
Good.
Okay. So if I have 0.35, what would it be as a fraction?
I don't think we did decimal or fraction. I think we only did actually. Oh no, I don't think we did actually.
Okay. So to change a decimal to a fraction, we move the decimal, from a decimal to a percentage. We move the decimal 2 places over, and we always do it to the right. So you're just going to go 1, 2, and this becomes 35%. It doesn't matter what the number is, even if it looks crazy, like if it looks like this, you're still going to do the same thing. You move 2 to the right, and it becomes 336.2%. So when you're doing decimal to percent, I keep saying fraction, you are going to move 2 spaces to the right. Make sense? If you're moving percentage to a decimal, you're going to move 2 spaces to the left. So if you have 36%, you're going to go 1, 2, and it's going to become 0.36. All right.
Wait, so how do you get it to a fraction?
Yeah, so far we've done decimal to percent and percent to decimal. Now to change it to a fraction, or to change a fraction to a decimal, we'll do both of them. Decimal to fraction is pretty easy. So we have 0.35, and we're going to say this number right here becomes my numerator. And then this ended on the hundredths, right? So this is the tenths and this is the hundredths. So whatever it ends on, we're going to write it as the denominator. So if it was 0.3625, we're going to write this as the numerator, 3625. And then our denominator is going to be where this ends, the last digit. So we have tenths, hundredths, thousands, 10,000s. So it's going to be 3,625 over 10,000. So that's how you do a decimal to a fraction. To do a fraction to a decimal, are you allowed to use calculators?
Yeah. Not for test, yeah, but like for
Homework. Okay. So it's basically the same thing whether you use a calculator or not. So you can do it by hand or you can do it by calculator, whatever your teacher says you can do. So if I have a fraction of 3/5, we type in 3 divided by 5 equals 0.6. If you're doing it by hand, then you do whatever the denominator is here and whatever the numerator is here. Now, sometimes people get confused on, like when you're taking a test, you go, oh wait, does the denominator go here or the numerator? So I always tell everybody, think of the alphabet. What comes first, D or N? D, right? So you just put a D and then you make your division symbol, and then what comes last in the alphabet, D or N? N. So if we were doing that, you would do the denominator over the numerator. And then 5 goes into 3 how many times? It doesn't. So we put our decimal. And then we add a 0. 5 goes into 36 times. 6 times 5 is 30 with a remainder of 0. There's an easier way to do it if the number can be turned into a 10 or a 100. For example, 3 over 50, we can change this to 100, right? So what would you do to change this 50 to 100? You would multiply it by 2, and then it's 6 over 100. Does that make sense? So we can do that if we can change the denominator to a 10 or a 100. But this will work no matter what the number is, so it's totally fine to do it that way. And so what we would do for this one is we would do 50 goes into 3 how many times? It doesn't, so we have to add a 0. 50 goes into 30 how many times? It doesn't, so we add a 0. 50 goes into 300 6 times. 6 times 50 is 300, which is the same. That's what 6 over 100 means, right? Make sense?
Yep.
Okay, we will hopefully be able to meet tomorrow for the last